I'm going to talk a little bit about pending legislation. And over 5,000 bills get introduced every session, so you never know what's going to move. But as you can see from the presentation today, most of these laws passed in the last session. The Sick Leave Act, the voters did on the ballot in November. But all the other laws came through the legislature, and so I'll highlight some for you. There's not a PowerPoint presentation. It's in your packet, the three bills. But if you have questions on other legislation that's pending that maybe particularly affects your business, obviously feel free to get in touch with questions. The first one I want to discuss is the act relative to the Defense Against Abusive Waivers. And basically, this has to do with contracts presented to an employee when he or she joins the company, waiving rights. And the main right that employees waive is the right to a jury trial. Typically, the contract would state there's binding arbitration, sometimes out of state. So say Bank of America is located in Charlotte, but obviously they do business in Massachusetts. They have a Massachusetts employee waive their right to a jury trial in their standard contract. That would be illegal under this legislation. And it's both pre-employment, or if you tender that document to the employee after they've begun, again, that would be illegal as well. And it does come with a retaliation claim, meaning if the employee refuses to sign it, and then there's any action, any kind of adverse action taken against that employee, it creates a claim, which lost wages, lost benefits, and the Attorney General would be able to enforce this, and the MCAD as well. The next bill is been circulating for a few sessions now on Beacon Hill, and it's a big one, and it would completely ban non-competition agreements in Massachusetts. I'll read you some of the language. It prohibits any agreement that prohibits, impairs, restrains, restricts, or places any condition on a person's ability to seek, engage in, or accept any type of employment or independent contractor work for any period of time after an employment relationship has ended. So this is similar to California. California has done this. And it's funny, there's a split in the business community. I get contacted by tech companies because the people usually think of this as benefiting employees. They can protect their intellectual property, and their trade secrets, customer lists. But if you think about, you're the employer trying to attract someone, you're prevented. And so the tech companies are getting in touch with me saying, we favor the ban. We favor labor mobility. Other companies contact me and they're not in favor of it. So there really is a split within the business community on this legislation. And there are a number of exceptions. I think the bill is reasonably well drafted, putting aside whether I favor it or disfavor it. I think it's well drafted because, for instance, there's a carve out for a covenant that would prevent the employee from soliciting or transacting business with customers, clients, or vendors. So say you have a key sales representative and you want to say, sure, you can leave, but you can't contact customers, clients. You can do that under this legislation, which is one of the big pieces employers worry about, obviously. There are other, it does not prevent the other agreements you might have an employee sign. So non-disclosure agreements, assignment of inventions, all the other sort of range of contracts employers use to protect their intellectual property would still be permissible. And then there's a carve out for the sale of a business and certain other items. And then the final bill I'll mention is a significant bill. There's no way to ever tell what's going to move to final passage, but this has over 100 co-sponsors. There's 160 of us, so there's already a majority of the House that's co-sponsored the bill. Now, again, that doesn't mean it's going to pass, but it may have some legs. And that is the Act to Establish Pay Equity. And what this bill does, it clarifies a Supreme Court decision here in the state that the comparable work standard must be based solely on comparable skill, effort, responsibility, and working conditions. It also would prohibit employers from banning employees from talking about their pay. Right now, employers can do that. And finally, it amends the anti-discrimination statute, 151B, to mandate that job advertisements must post the minimum wage that's going to be paid for the job. It makes it unlawful for an employer to pay wages less than what's been advertised. And finally, it makes it unlawful to use salary history when you're hiring. And the theory there is if women have perennially had institutionalized forces holding back their pay, if they have to disclose their salary history, it could hurt them in a negotiation for their next job. So the good thing about this for employers is it creates a defense, which there's no other law, I think, in Massachusetts that creates a defense against wage claims. And this defense says is if you do a self-evaluation, if you look at your pay structure, if you go through your organization and try to assess whether there might be disparities in pay between the genders, and you document it, then a claim comes later, you can defend against it. So I think employers like that piece that if you take proactive steps, you can be insulated from liability. So those are some of the ones that I think are kind of hot on Beacon Hill. There are a number of other ones. Obviously, I know many of you may worry about the independent contractor statute. I get a lot of questions about that. There are a number of bills to look at some of the problematic aspects of that. So again, feel free to get in touch on any legislation. And thanks. Any questions? Or?
David, I have a question on the posting of jobs. So you're saying based on experience, you can't say anymore under this new law if one is posting for a job? Because that's a pretty common thing on a lot of postings.
Well, that's right. You mean you have to list the minimum amount you pay. So for salary commensurate with experience, gone under this bill.
Okay. And when do you expect these to be passed?
Well, again, I really have to stress, I mean, I'm in my second term, and the legislature moves in strange and mysterious ways, you know. I even talk to chairs of committees, and I'll go to them, and I'll say, you know, what's going to happen? It's in your committee. And they'll say, well, on the one hand, on the other, because there's so many forces at work with what might make it move. But the session is 2 years, 2015 and 2016. And so the House and Senate are currently in, I don't know if you've been reading about this, in a standoff over committee structure. So nothing's really moving right now. I expect that to be resolved soon, and then legislation will begin to move. So, but probably the early part of next year.